Right. I remembered I muted my microphone earlier for something else. That would have been an awkward 20 seconds while people went, Bill, your microphone's not on. Right, it's now on, hopefully. Hello, everyone. I'm not actually sure what we're going to... I've put like 3 different things around me because I think this coming week might be quite an interesting week, more so than usual. Obviously, the obvious one to anticipate this week will be Boris Johnson's hearing for the Privileges Committee. But there's a few things going on. There's been some protests around the country against the government's their illegal migration bill, their latest nonsense. We've also got the government are now starting to decide that they're messing about over public sector pay, needs winding up now. So all of a sudden, quelle surprise, they're now starting to negotiate properly. Obviously, what's now going to happen, the government aren't like backing down or anything. What's going to happen is they're going to make offers that will be accepted, but without putting any more money into it. Even though they've taken in more money from taxes than they planned to. Nonetheless, so for example, the pay increase for nurses will come out of existing NHS budgets. So, you know, the pay increase for teachers, which will inevitably also be following, that'll come from the education budget. Again, no new money or anything like that. So the government will still be doing what they always do, using it. They've been using the strikes, first of all, as an excuse to drive their culture wars. Now they're going to use it as an excuse to weaken public services even more. But anyway, let us, and obviously, well, yeah, so those are the 3 images I put up there. But there could be any number of things. Let's just go down the list and see what people come up with. Oh, Rob's there. Hope Phil casts his eye on Theresa Coffey and her urging for people to eat turnips without knowing that the biggest provider of turnips was a constituent who's gone bust. See, that was a funny one. I've seen that all over the news. I'll inevitably talk about it myself at some point, I suppose, in a video. But when that kept coming out, and why are people talking about this? Why are people talking about it? Because when Theresa Coffey did suggest, a few weeks ago now, wasn't it? I can't remember, when was it? So much has happened in the last few weeks, I can't actually remember when it was. But at some point, I think it was a few weeks ago now, may have been a month ago, and she suggested, well, people should eat turnips instead. And you know, after the initial wave of ridicule, you know, I mean, my suggestion was, whoever heard of a cheese and turnip sandwich, was, or turnip sauce for your pizza base. It was actually in the news that the largest turnip producer in the country is in her constituency, and said turnip producer was saying that they're having a hell of a job because of the extra costs. It's not worth producing the turnips. So this stuff that's now, and I gather it's found it, it's been reported in The Guardian today really. It's just that someone's written a piece about it. It's not that it's breaking news or anything. But it is, and it shows a lack of, you know, as an MP, you really should have some decent local knowledge, you would think, wouldn't you? I'm not actually totally against MPs being flown in. If you're a good MP, you know, if you're a good candidate, you're going to be a star of the future. I'm okay with some. I like most MPs to be local, at least live locally. They don't have to have grown up there. But you know, even if you have been flown in, and I don't know where she's from, you learn about your local economy at least. How can you make a statement like that and then get caught out so quickly? But anyway, and the reason they've gone bust, of course, is because supermarkets fix prices, and they've fixed the price below the level of production now. So it's really that simple. Farmers are saying, okay, well, now the cost of energy and other things that have gone up with the massive increase in inflation means that it costs us X amount to produce a turnip or whatever it is they're producing, because there's plenty of other things gone by the wayside as well. And supermarkets are going, yeah, but that's above the level at which we're going to pay for it, in which case it's like, well, you're not going to get them then. So we're now basically getting our turnips from France. That's the bottom line. Because as a combination of the high energy costs in the UK and UK supermarket price fixing, we're now getting our turnips from France. So inevitably I am going to have to do a video on food security at some point this week, aren't I? But anyway, Brad there, if the Privileges Committee wrap up this week, they won't wrap up this week. I'd be very surprised. I mean, I don't know how long it will take, but anyway, I'll read the whole thing. And recommend a long suspension, then the 3 worst world leaders in modern times will all, by the sounds of it, be in criminal or legal trouble within a week. You're assuming that Johnson's going to perjure himself. Again, I strongly suspect we're spending £250,000 on top lawyers to stop Johnson perjuring himself. You know, if £250,000 can't give him the best legal advice, I don't know what will. I mean, I thought that the solicitor I had to take on cost enough. Bloody hell, £250,000 just to teach you not to break the law in a hearing. And I did see, yeah, Trump whining that he was going to be arrested on Tuesday. But I mean, I don't know what the hell that is. Oh, he called he called for another insurrection. They're trying to accuse me of an insurrection. Everyone should now form an insurrection to save me from it. But who tells someone 3 days in advance they're going to arrest them? Like, seriously. So, I mean, of all the days when Trump may or may not be arrested, I don't think Tuesday's going to be it. Because who on earth goes to, what law enforcement says to a potential criminal, we're going to arrest you in 3 or 4 days time. Don't you go disappearing now. Absolute nonsense. But anyway, John there likes the noon video today. I know you can't get lilt these days. Have I moved on to the Kool-Aid? No, you can get lilt. It's days are numbered. Look, I still have it. I'm still able to get it. It's just that its days are numbered. So I mean, I don't drink it all the time, but I am at the moment because at some point I won't be able to. So I'm getting it while I can. Not many places you can get it. Morrison, I mostly now get it from Marks and Spencer's. Morrison sometimes has it and sometimes not. Marks and Spencer's mostly does have it. But anyway, and I've never had Kool-Aid before in my life. There were a couple of things that are quite, when I went to America when I was a teenager, you know, and there were lots of things I tried there that were famous, you know, like Oreo. I mean, you can get Oreos in this country now, but at the time you couldn't. Or if you could, they were niche. You certainly weren't in the supermarkets. So, you know, you had some things that, like, you know, you associate with American food. And but 2 things I never had were Kool-Aid, because just the idea of it sounded terrible. Never mind its association. And the other was Twinkies. You know, obviously you'd heard of Twinkies from Ghostbusters. But when I saw a Twinkie for the first time, I looked at it and I thought, that looks radioactive. I'm not eating that. Didn't even look like food. So I've no idea what Kool-Aid even tastes like. I mean, it might be even worse than Sunny Delight, and that's got a very unpleasant chemical aftertaste. But anyway, well, Rob's talking about the Trump facing arrest on Tuesday. Hopefully Johnson joins him on Wednesday. I mean, I don't think so. He's not going to perjure himself. He's not. I'd be very interested to see what he is going to do. I don't think that is it. Right, something about pagan symbology there. Symbols. I'm not really, beyond the pentagram, not really familiar with pagan symbols. Do goats' heads count as well? Oh, Uncle Social, just returned from a short break to the Far East. What have I missed? Quite a lot of things. There's been quite a lot of goings on in the last few weeks. So it depends how short the break was. Have I seen the recent Ford broadcast? No, I've heard that for those who don't know, Ford was the Casey now, I suppose, the barrister who was taken on by Labour to basically draw up recommendations to deal with racism in the Labour Party, and he's now saying that they've done the work on anti-Semitism, but there's still problems of racism in the Labour Party, and he'll absolutely be right. I mean, what I read into what he's complaining about, so he's complaining that Labour maybe aren't taking Islamophobia and racism against black people as seriously as anti-Semitism. I have a concern that that is the case. But he was also basically saying that he should be involved in the process. And I was thinking, well, I can understand why you'd want to be, but I don't think you get to criticise Labour for not involving you. They employed him for a particular purpose, and it wouldn't be ridiculous to take him on to help drive those recommendations through. But there's no real reason why he'd have to be. But it is a concern for me, and I'll tell you where I bet the problem is. And this will be the case in any organisation. I am not blind to the fact that there is racism in the Labour Party. And it's one of these things where politicians will always fear opening up a can of worms, as they say. Even though I've never understood that statement, because if you actually had a can of worms and you opened it, not a lot would happen. Worms are not very active. But anyway, I suppose does it derive from opening like food and it's got worms in it instead? I don't know. The whole point of canning was to stop that. Anyway, doesn't matter. The worry will be that anti-Semitism already was such a huge issue. It took a lot of dealing with, and they knew that the Tory press would make a massive meal of it. And you're always going to get this thing with political parties or any organisation. It's like, on the one hand, you want to deal with the problem. On the other hand, you don't want it to be dealt with publicly because of the negative association that people will then draw with your party. Because if Labour were to tackle racism properly, they'd be identifying themselves as a racist party, which won't be true, but nonetheless. And you can imagine Labour have now just about got a lid on the attempted civil wars in the party. They're trying to get them, and I'm not excusing this, by the way, I'm just saying this will be what the thinking is. They'll be thinking to themselves, we've just about got the party united, the civil war is under control, they're getting themselves ready for government, and they will be saying to themselves, consciously or subconsciously, that what we don't want to do is stir up a hornet's nest. The anti-Semitism had to be dealt with, because how could it not be? There was an independent report saying that the party was institutionally racist along anti-Semitic lines, so. But that'll be what is there, and I from the inside, I get the impression that they're not dealing with all forms of racism as well as they are now dealing with anti-Semitism, which is disappointing, because it's not like they've brought in anything that is specifically to deal with anti-Semitism. The same processes should deal with all forms of racism. They're very general. But I just think there's probably the greatest emphasis on dealing with anti-Semitism, because that was the tag that got stuck to the Labour Party. But there are plenty of racists in Labour. If you go into a local Labour Party meeting, depending on where you are, I'm not saying they all are, but at some point, if you go to enough meetings, you will come across racists. But anyway, so you're saying there doesn't seem to be much faith in Labour, though they far outstrip the Tories. Is there any chance that they would seriously let us down if elected? It depends what you want. If you want things to be better, then no. They will always be better. They'll be much better as well. It won't be you'll have to get a microscope and a graph out to see the difference. When people say, oh, there's no difference between Labour and the Conservatives, you can show charts measuring anything, performance of public services, the economy, people's real term wage increases, whatever you look at as a measure of whether the government's doing well or not, Labour will always outperform the Conservatives. But there will also be things that people prioritise. So individuals will have their priorities. I have my priorities, for example, and Labour may not meet your expectations on all of those. So it sort of depends on the Venn diagram of your priorities and Labour's priorities in government, where the crossover is. So for me, for example, I am satisfied that they will work very hard to get the NHS back into shape. I am satisfied that they will improve education. I am satisfied that they will improve the economy. I am not necessarily satisfied that their should we say Brexit reversal will go exactly as I'm hoping, even though, you know, I say enough times their current policies are all you can expect of any party over the next few years. But I will always have in the back of my mind, I'm not sure what their plan is for the following Parliament. So we'll have to see on that one. That's where they're more likely to let me down. The other one, of course, is proportional representation. So those are electoral reform, which in some form is coming, and Brexit are the two areas where I may be outside that crossover on the Venn diagram. A written constitution would be required to ensure the independence of public institutions and government ethics. The constitution would be above the government. Yes, but as I keep saying, a codified, I hate the word written constitution because it is written, codified constitution, which means it's written in one place, is still written by whoever's in charge at the time. You know, the problem with the codified constitution is it's written by the people who are in charge at the time. And the problem is you then create a shrine around it so that then in 50 years time, 100 years time, 200 years time, people still venerate it as being this universal wisdom when it's no longer fit for purpose. I much prefer a more flexible constitution. What I would say is, for fans of a codified constitution, I keep saying, if you read Gordon Brown's paper, which was commissioned by Labour, it's not an independent thing, and Starmer was welcomed it, it doesn't explicitly state codified constitution. However, some of the things are impossible to implement without one. So it does sort of hint at it, but I'm not a fan. Ewan doesn't like Hershey bars. I didn't mind Hershey bars. I quite like, well, I mean, I suppose it's your taste of where you grow up, isn't it? You know, I quite like Dairy Milk and Galaxy, but you know, that's probably just because I grew to like the taste because that's what we had in this country. Rob saying, all is not well at the SNP. Chief executives resigned. Opportunity for Labour in Scotland. Yeah, I don't know what they're doing at the SNP. I really don't know what they're doing. It's so self-destructive, isn't it? It really is. So you've got this weird combination going on with the SNP, and first of all, the leadership candidates aren't great. In isolation, Kate Forbes is coming across as being the more polished, but she also, it's not her views, it's the fact that her views are an outlier and she wants party policy to reflect her views. That's where there's a real problem. So she's going to cause friction if she wins. I mean, Hamza Yusuf, he just gets, I mean, what was it? He dropped a bollock this week, didn't it? He was posing for photos with some Ukrainian refugees, women. And he asked where the men were, and they basically said they're fighting in the war. I mean, for goodness sake. And then the thing as well, I mean, okay, you say something like that and you go, oh, yeah, okay. But he didn't. He tried to get out of it. He tried to mech out. He hadn't said something really stupid. And then you've got this thing with now the chief executive, of course, is Sturgeon's husband. There were calls for him to step down when she resigned to make sure that all of the candidates could have confidence, because obviously the chief executive is very much like the party chair, so they deal with, as it would be for the Tory party or the Labour Party. So they deal with the leadership content, although of course in the case of the Tory party it's the chair of the 1922 committee that manages the leadership contest, but he is nonetheless in that position in the SNP of managing the leadership contest. So given that everyone had the impression that Sturgeon had a particular preference for the next leader, for her successor, it really wasn't a good look to have her husband overseeing the process, because I mean, he might be entirely neutral, but he may not be. So there were calls for him to have stepped down before, and now after. So what's happened now is, first of all, so someone else had to step down. So basically, there were reports that SNP membership has fallen somewhat. Okay, I mean, they're not saying it's fallen like recently. It's like since 2021. But then there was a denial that they'd fallen. Then the results came out. It's like, oh, they have fallen. So there was the resignation. It's all very messy. It's incredibly messy. It's needless. It's unforced errors. It's not as a result of like the Tory press hammering or anything. These are all unforced errors. I don't think they're going to have. When this is over, and it's a week on Monday that the new leader is announced. The voting ends and the new leader is announced on the same day. And I don't see really the SNP kicking on from here. I think they're going to, unless they very quickly realise the importance of unity, I think they're going to be indulging in a bit of infighting here. Because all they've done with all this mess is given whoever loses an opportunity to attack the process and call it unfair or say there was dirty dealings or whatever. But anyway. Joining late after Ireland's glorious victory over the villainous English. What do you mean villainous? We did get a red card. I'm not... I'm never proud of that. I've only watched the first bits myself. I watched long enough to realise that we were onto a hiding anyway. I mean, we got absolutely walloped by France last week, and obviously Ireland top of the table. So, and going to get the Grand Slam. But there it is. Long time ago now, it seems, since that stunning victory over New Zealand in the World Cup semi-final. Long time ago now. Wasn't actually that long ago, but it seems it. But anyway. Yes, PR, but add voting on the end of it could mean public relations. When I say PR, it always means proportional representation. Written constitution could be put to popular regional assemblies like they do in Ireland when they debated abortion. Yeah, the problem is that we have a very different system in this country. We don't really have that. I keep saying the problem with the UK is it's basically a federalised model without a federalised structure. That's where we keep having problems, but we don't have that structure. And actually you find that there's a lot of resistance to it. You know, Tony Blair recognised this problem. He tried to implement some sort of federalisation into the UK. And in England, I mean, obviously, devolution, Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales, went ahead. But in England, he couldn't get people to accept it, which, presumably means he came up with the wrong system for it. I mean, that was probably where it went wrong. I fundamentally don't believe that people in England don't want more regional control over what happens. So it's potentially the form of control that didn't take on. But that's why you also need to get something that is appealing. I mean, we don't have regional assemblies. We have councils, but they're filled with some of the worst people imaginable. The most incompetent, self-serving nutters. You know, someone like Lee Anderson, he's an MP now. There was a time when being a councillor was like, he's the typical councillor, just self-serving and useless. You know, someone like that, if they ever became an MP, would never have gotten anywhere in the party hierarchy, in any party hierarchy. You know, and that is a typical councillor. You really wouldn't want them dealing with anything. They can't even manage potholes. You won't want them dealing with anything more complicated. The US Constitution was written by barristers. Well, all laws are written by lawyers, but the policy is put forward by people in charge at the time. You didn't have a bunch of lawyers go to the founding fathers and say, here's your constitution, like it or lump it, did they? If you let the wrong person write it, you end up with a constitution like in Chile that preserves bad power structures. But my argument is, even if you don't, even if the constitution absolutely works for the time and it's thought of everything, in 50 years' time, things change and you need to be flexible enough to change. And yes, you can amend a constitution. America's amended its constitution. But the problem is, it's not just that it's not just that it's the case that you need a supermajority to amend the constitution. It's the fact that people start to venerate it as something that shouldn't be touched, as if, you know, even if you've got a majority, you think, well, this needs to change. It's almost like, well, you're betraying some mythical past if you try and do so. You end up with opposition to amending a constitution for the sake of it. Where we've got a problem in this country is not that we have a flexible constitution. That is a good thing. It's a benefit. The problem we have is that it is possible for a single political party to make changes to the constitution. That is where there's an issue. You know, if we had a situation where it was not possible for any one political party to change, you know, if we had a situation where it required, if it was going to be, well, changing the constitution would be UK-wide, realistically. So if it had required Westminster to support it, plus 2 of the 3 devolved assemblies or parliaments. You know, so let's say you needed the Senate and Stormont to support it, along with Westminster. That would have stopped Brexit, because Westminster would have had 0 support for it. You know, or if you needed something like 70% of MPs in Westminster to approve of something. You know, if you just had a situation that just prevented a single party making major constitutional changes, because the whole point of a government is it shouldn't really be possible. Yes, they can do good things for the country, they can do bad things, but it shouldn't be possible for them to introduce anything that the next government cannot, if it needed to, repeal. Whereas it has done, because Brexit cannot be reversed. Well, in time it will be, but it cannot, you know, the next government can't just come in and say that was a stupid decision, reverse it. You know, they're able to repeal laws, but not a big constitutional change like that. So that's my issue with it. You know, it would be easy to get the safeguards in by just requiring more of a coalition of support for a constitutional change. You don't need it writing down. Well, it is written down, but you don't need it writing down in one place. That doesn't do anything. The American Constitution doesn't protect the United States. Let's start with a Bill of Rights. Yeah, the problem is the Tories are very keen on their Bill of Rights because it'll be a bill of removing rights. The problem is when you do things like that, it's I mean, Starmer obviously is very keen on devolving power away from Westminster. It's no good removing it just from the government as well, because I mean, even the video I did today where I suggested, say, the board of governors at the BBC should just be MPs, where no more than a third can be from any one party. Okay, even if you introduce that, there would do nothing to stop, if the Conservatives came back into office, them changing it back again and appointing all of them. There'd be nothing to stop them doing that. So it's not so, you know, this is why I think Starmer's emphasis is not just removing power from government, because this and you know, despite what people will say about Starmer, one thing is quite clear: he's not a politician, really. He's someone who's obviously from a very young age been fiercely interested in politics. I mean, he edited a Trotskyite journal, for goodness sake, when he was younger. But it's he's come into politics late in life after a successful career and with change on his mind. You know, he's actually I just think, give it a few years, we'll see what happens. Obviously he can't do everything on his own, he will need the party behind him. I just think we're going to find out that he's more revolutionary than any prime minister we've had in modern times, maybe since Clement Attlee. I suppose you could argue Ted Heath. I suppose joining the EEC was a bit of a revolution in many ways. Maybe I shouldn't dismiss that too readily. I think I've missed my comment. Yeah, I have missed your comments, and I always do, don't I? Sorry. But I think there's a clear desire to remove Parliament, some powers from Parliament that won't be easily repatriated to them. But anyway, in Switzerland, you need a majority in Parliament and win in a two-bar referendum. I mean, Switzerland, though, has... I mean, I'm not in favour of Switzerland having a referendum on everything. You know, they're not far off from having a referendum on what colour suits they should wear, you know, in schools. It's... But, of course, because they have so many referenda, yes, they have more robust rules on how to deal with them. We are not really... We don't... I mean, there's been a flurry of referenda under David Cameron when he was Prime Minister. But as a country, we don't really have them. We don't really have them. But anyway, is it possible to have a truly independent BBC? Who says it's independent? In terms of completely independent, no, because if it has public money, inevitably it has to be the people who, and we expect it as well, the people who provide that money must have oversight. And Parliament are the custodians of our money, effectively. They're our representatives, so they need to have oversight. But what I would say is, if you've got the Board of Governors of the BBC are MPs, cross-party group of MPs, where no one party has even more than a third, that way it's not possible for one party to get its own way, then it will work as well as a select committee at least. And select committees actually do have, you know, there's lots of select committees where a majority of Tory MPs, in fact most of them are, if not all of them, but certainly most of them have a majority of Tory MPs because they've got the numbers to do it. And, you know, and they still work pretty well. So if you had a situation where you couldn't even get more than a third, you know, I would say that is as independent as you can make it. Brown's replacement of the laws with a regional assembly for the UK based at Westminster is madness. Nobody's asking for. Devolution should be in the regions, including across England. The issue, though, I think is, first of all, Gordon Brown, remember, was part of the government that tried to do that and it didn't work. I agree that we need a more federal system, particularly throughout England. But they tried it and it didn't work. And it'd be madness to try it again. Yes, you could say people's attitudes may have changed, but have they changed in that regard? And it's like the situation is, you could look at it as a first step as well. The situation is this simple: the House of Lords used to work. It used to work because all it was required to do was scrutinise government legislation. But it's now been so jammed full, and it's still not a majority of Tory Lords, but it's now been jammed so full of not just Conservative peers, but of a particular type of Conservative peer, most of whom are not politicians, so they've got no experience of scrutinising legislation either. What's Ian Botham? How does he know how to scrutinise legislation? He hasn't got a clue, has he? People shoving people like that into the House of Lords, absolutely ridiculous. So they can't do their job, and most of them are not willing to do their job. He's shoved them in there so that not just the government, because where tight votes go a particular way, and when Labour in government, that means they go another way. So are we going to wait for the House of Lords to start defeating Labour government legislation? Because the people he shoved into the Lords now do not respect the conventions. The convention is, and we gripe about it when the Lords are letting through terrible legislation, but the convention is they're not supposed to stop it. They're really, unless they've got a bloody good reason, and I mean a bloody good reason, they're not really supposed to block the House of Commons because that's elected. So what do you do about a situation like this? You know, so you have the House of Lords at the moment is not working. It's now broken. The Tories have broken it. 10 years ago, I wouldn't have been in favour of making it democratic because it's like, well, what's the point? Now, and I don't want a chamber that blocks the House of Commons. I don't want a situation like you have in US politics where you have different branches just blocking each other for party political reasons, not because they're genuinely disagreeing. But you have to do something. So you have to reform the House of Lords. So it's really this simple. You need more. You need people to have more say in what goes on in their local region. You can't just have regional assemblies because people don't want them. You have a problem with the House of Lords not working at the moment. And I think Brown's come up with a start of something that could solve two problems at once, and it can always then be refined later. Because just because something isn't popular doesn't mean it's not a good idea. We cannot have the situation that we continue to have. If Labour come in and don't do anything to our politics, if all they do is come in and fix the economy and fix the NHS and fix schools and fix the railways and whatever they do, or the Tories come back in at some point, all of it's washed away again. It's all gone. I look back at Labour's legacy from the last time they were in government, and okay, there's a few laws still in place, but that gave people certain rights, but I would also argue there's been other laws coming that have effectively taken them away. So I look at Labour's legacy and see nothing. Nothing. The NHS was working, it's not anymore. Education was working, people could retrain, you could go to college as an adult learner and you could learn all sorts of useful courses, can't anymore. You know, the trains aren't even running, never mind running on time. They're maybe not running on time in the south of England. In the north of England, they're not running at all. You know, nothing's working. It's all broken. Labour, it's like Labour didn't even exist. What would I think of having 2 or 3 MPs as heads of departments or secretaries of state instead of just one? Pros and cons. Oh no, that's what Hitler did. It was, and I don't know whether he did it deliberately. His thinking was to create competition. So he, in his government, would always have like 2 people with basically the same job, and it was their job to outcompete each other and come up with the best solution. But it's absolute chaos, ridiculous. No, you can't have that. You need policymakers. You need the whole point of government, right? Is because if you didn't have government, you'd be expecting 650 MPs to agree with each other on budgets and legislation, as well as guidelines for public sector and all the rest of it. And they'd never agree. So even narrowing it down to 2 or 3, you know, if you get even two people together, they're not going to agree on everything. Absolute nonsense. Ian Botham taught us you can't eat more than 2 shredded wheat. Well, I could. I can't anymore. Wouldn't even want to. It's horrible. But anyway. Let's try and pick some things out. The conventions were also there to protect the hereditaries, therefore most of them have been ignored since Reform 1. Well, yeah, I mean, hereditary peers. I'm much more in favour. See, I don't completely dismiss hereditary peers, because you can say, you know, hereditary peer will have been brought up to understand their role that they're going to inherit, so they'll have had effectively lifetimes training. But I'd still rather people had proven experience. So the sorts of people, if you're going to have an unelected chamber whose job is mostly to scrutinise and suggest amendments, obviously very senior lawyers, yeah, business leaders, yeah, trade union leaders, yeah, you know, very senior side, like leaders in various sectors of the economy. So senior scientists, senior teachers, senior doctors, and so on. And former senior politicians. I would say, for example, that you should only be elevated to the House of Lords as a politician if you were, I don't know, I would maybe even, I don't know, it's tricky. I'm just not happy with the people of the calibre of Nadine Dorries ending up in there. Do you know what I mean? Sorry, you may have to just stick it in on Wednesday. I get 2 minutes on Saturday. PR, you know, is for me, it is the only way. And I mean, my worry is that we end up, and I keep saying this, that we end up with some hybrid system like they have in Holyrood or the Senate. It's rubbish. It's a little better. It's a little better than pure first past the post, but it is mostly first past the post. You know, you can have people with a minority of the votes getting a majority of the seats, and you do get that in both Holyrood and the Senate. So it wouldn't stop, that hybrid system would not stop the Conservatives having 100% in the power and doing all the terrible things they do. What do I make of Tory MPs getting a free vote on Boris Johnson's punishment if found guilty? The only way for Sunak to deal with it. Imagine I mean, he'll get it in the neck whatever he does, right? So by letting his MPs have a free vote, he will enrage Johnson's supporters because they want him to whip against the punishment, but obviously he can't do that. That's ridiculous. If he were to whip in favour of the punishment to support the Privileges Committee, then that would enrage Johnson supporters and they would vote against it anyway. So he basically faces a rebellion for what? For no good reason. For no good reason. You know, this is the only way. He's given them a free vote, so it doesn't come back on him. However they vote, he's basically saying to them, this is not a party political issue. This is a parliamentary procedure, and MP, it's not anything to do with our manifesto. It's got nothing to do with government policy. None of those. So in actual fact, and that'd all be right as well. It wouldn't just be guff. That is actually true. In fact, really, MPs should not be whipped for a vote like this. There should actually be a rule that you don't whip. In fact, I don't know, there maybe is. But there certainly should be a rule that you do not whip for something like this, because it is not a matter It's got nothing to do with the party's policy. Nothing at all. It should be a free vote. Always should be a free vote. But it's the only decision that would have made sense to Sunak at all. And he will abstain, by the way. He won't be there that day. And it won't be he'll make sure he's busy on the day the vote of the punishment is. He will make sure he's not there. I will guarantee, well, almost guarantee, I can't actually speak for him. Is Johnson buying a mansion in the Cotswolds? It was somewhere in Oxfordshire, I don't remember exactly where. Mean that he's disappearing from Westminster, we can hope and pray. Maybe, or maybe, there are some safe seats in Oxfordshire for the Tories, you see. It may be, because I don't know that he's bought it yet, although I think there was an agreement in principle. But an agreement in principle with Boris Johnson doesn't mean very much, let's be honest. Whoever's selling it will probably have to consider that it's not been sold at all until they've got the money. But it could well be that Johnson thinks he's going to lose that seat, doesn't fancy standing in the by-election, will sulk for a bit, pretend he's hurt by all the witch hunt, and then 6 months later tip someone the nod to step down in a safe seat in Oxfordshire, and then he'll stand as the by-election there saying he's finished sulking now. I'm going back to the House of Lords thing here. So long as the second chamber doesn't challenge the primacy of the Commons, but does have effective revision in conjunction with the courts, hold the Commons accountable and protect. See, the purpose, so in Brown's vision, the purpose of the reformed House of Lords would still be to scrutinise but not remove the primacy of the House of Commons, but also be champions of the Constitution. They are the idea of the second chamber will be to be able to refer the government to the Supreme Court on constitutional matters. So they're supposed to also be like custodians of the Constitution. Can easily work. There's no reason at all why you have to set it up so that the elected chamber can block. You just have to put in the usual safeguards. And we already have the Parliament Act. There's no reason why you can't just beef that up a little bit. So for those who don't know, amongst other things, the Parliament Act, if the House of Lords does block House of Commons legislation and keeps blocking it, you can just wait for the next session of Parliament and then ram it through with the Parliament Act, and the Lords can't do anything. You just beef that up a little bit and you can still do that. You did ask me about this, what do I think of 2 or 3 MPs as heads of department instead of just one? Pros and cons, all cons, every single one of them. As I said before, Hitler tried it, it was a stupid idea. You just have people disagree, nothing will get done. The whole point of an executive is to give individual people policy making decisions so that you don't have to keep having them rammed through committee. Why isn't Gordon Brown championing PR? I can only guess. Labour have a funny relationship with proportional representation, and it goes all the way down as well. So from the top point of view, there are people in Labour, and I don't know what Gordon Brown's personal thoughts on it are, because a lot of Labour politicians will keep their own counsel on this. There are people in Labour who are comfortable with winning power every so often and having all of the power to put their changes through, and then accepting that you then lose power and the people who replace you are the Tories, who are your nemesis. Now, the reason why there's such a lot of sustained support amongst the membership now for proportional representation is because people have just looked at the damage done. They've looked at the damage done. It's like if you look at Thatcher and Major years, at the end of it, we still had an NHS, we still had a school system, we still had quite a few public services. They'd all been pretty much privatised, but they were still there. and they still worked. And you felt you could still reverse it. Whereas now, since from Cameron onwards, you're just looking at devastation. So a lot of people in the party, obviously myself included, are looking at this terrible mess and thinking, yeah, we can't keep letting these people back in, because they're now seeing the Tory party in a fundamentally different light. Not just as people who are basically honourable but massively disagree with them, but people who actually will tear everything down. That's one type of thinking, the idea that it's better to have 100% of the power for so many years, even if it means then losing it to the Tories. The other type of thinking is on a more individual and selfish level. If you take, say, somewhere like Manchester or Liverpool, you know, northern cities where it's basically Labour MPs, if you have proportional representation, then there are going to be some Conservative MPs there. So you'll have Labour MPs in Tory areas that are currently Tory areas, but you'll also have Tory MPs in what are currently Labour areas. And that means that all of a sudden there's a different attitude needed for your candidates, because you then have to fight. There's no sitting on massive majorities and having an easy career. You've then got to actually you've got to prove yourself to be worthy of being a candidate, because, you know, there are some parts of the country where Labour just know they're going to get a clean sweep. That won't be the case with proportional representation. So there'll need to be an emphasis on better quality candidates, but also in some areas you'll get, like, it's no surprise that someone like Angela Rayner says that she's not in favour of PR, because she is an MP in an area where everyone around her is also a Labour MP pretty much, and several of her regional colleagues will lose their seats. They will not win with PR. So there's a selfish attitude to it as well. And, you know, but the fact that the membership and now increasingly unions are much more in favour of PR, I would just say, we're not going to get it in the next Parliament, or I'd be pleased, but I'd be very surprised. But I'm just thinking maybe the one after. We'll see. You're going to read Patient Last Comment after, okay. Regarding Boris Johnson, hopefully things will be slightly less busy towards the end of my stream. They won't be, because we are towards the end of the stream. You think you use your witchy powers and cast a banishing spell on Johnson. See where it lands on Wednesday for like. No, I want him there. I want him there. Been waiting for this day for a long time. I thought it'd be done and dusted months ago. I don't want him disappearing. I don't want him banishing. I want him to face this inquiry. I'm not particularly relishing the massive display of snowflakery that we're going to get in the Tory media in the days leading up to it and afterwards. You know, because there is a part of you that can think, you know, won't it be glorious, all these Conservative outlets all like clutching their pearls over the fact that one of them is going to face consequences. But then you also remember that these are still like news media, and they'll be wasting everyone's, instead of reporting on the news, they'll be wasting everyone's time with Boris bloody Johnson. So PR is the most sensible, equitable approach, rebalances the value agency of each person's vote. It does, and I'll tell you another thing it does as well. It completely changes electoral strategy. And I think, so for example, if you look at Labour's pitch at the moment, it is as it is because they are pitching to a particular group of voters. With proportional representation, it would change. Which means that the policies that, because remember, there are policies that a party leadership adopts because they believe they are the right policies. And there are other policies that they adopt which are like concessions in order to win the election. And if you are your concessionary policies will change if you change the electoral system, because your target voters will change. So an awful lot of good will, it won't be perfect. I'm not going to pretend it's perfect. There's no perfect system. Democracy itself is actually a shambles of a system for appointing governments. Absolute shambles. Because you end up with people who have no qualifications, not necessarily much, if any, intelligence. They may be corrupt as hell. It's a terrible system. It's just, as Churchill said, it's better than anything else. Which will Labour wish to implement? AV or AV plus? I mean, neither of those are proportional representation. They're different systems. I think if Labour push major Westminster reform, my worry is that here's the deal. If you're thinking about it strategically, right? So there's only two ways to implement it. Either you have to promise it in a manifesto and then win the election, or you have to promise a referendum and then win the referendum. So they will, and it's no good asking me, I mean, you can ask me if you like, which is best. My preference is to put it in the manifesto and win the election. And the reason I say that is because I can imagine, but this is empirical thinking, I don't know it's true. I can imagine a scenario where, so let's say they win the next election as they are at the moment, just to get rid of the Tories. So then they have to think to themselves, okay, so how do we win the election after that? They could promise proportional representation for Westminster, and that way a load of Green and Lib Dem voters in areas which are basically between the Tories and Labour will vote Labour. So they suddenly get themselves the borrowed votes of a load of Lib Dem and Green voters. Okay, some others as well potentially, but you know, in those would be the richest plums, and that maximises your chances of winning. But you'd also have to say, first of all, will you get more votes from borrowed Lib Dem and Green votes than you lose because the Tory media will absolutely trash the hell out of your plans and put the fear of God into people? Are you better off going with a referendum and then hoping to win that referendum? It's a tricky one, and you won't be able to come up with the right decision empirically. You will have to poll and have very good analysts working out what is going to give you your best chance. But my preferred one is a is the manifesto and then implement. And the reason is because then my worry with a referendum is, in order to maximise your chance of winning, make it seem less scary. Full proportional representation might sound scary, whereas if it's a combination of proportional representation and first past the post, like you have in Holyrood, like you have in the Senate, which is more familiar, because you can say to people, well, you know, we do have these systems already in the UK. They have them in Scotland, they have them in Wales. They're happy enough with them. We will just do the same thing. That's my worry, that we end up with something like that, which is a mist. And once you've made a change, it's not like you can think 10 years time change it again. It'll be there for quite a long time. So I would want full proportional representation. I think the easiest way to get it is to promise it in a referendum. Referendum. Behave. Why is my brain doing this to me? To promise it in a manifesto, and then go ahead with it. But it does mean you're going to have the details in the manifesto, because what you can't really do is say we'll come up with the specifics of it when we win. We'll do a public consultation. It's like, if you're going to do a public consultation, are you going to have a referendum with it? No, why not? So just put the details in the manifesto, say proportional representation and this form of proportional representation, you know, closed party list, a hunt system, that, all the rest of it. That's my preference, but whatever they go with. Right, here's one. We've got the last few. Tony Blair promised PR in 1987. No, he didn't. I have checked. He didn't. And then he reneged on his promise. He didn't renege on his promise. If you look at the 1997 Labour Party manifesto, he did not promise proportional representation. What he promised was a public review on the feasibility of proportional representation, with a view to presenting a model that could work. But there was no promise to implement it. And that review did take place. Now, I will grant you that it was never mind Iraq, never mind, you know, PFI, Tony Blair's biggest mistake and these were big mistakes, but Tony Blair's biggest mistake was not implementing proportional representation, but he did not promise to. He promised a review, which there was a review. He just then did nothing with it, but he didn't promise to do anything with it. I will concede that a lot of people may have taken it to mean that proportional representation would result from it. There may well have been Lib Dem voters who supported Labour because they thought that that was the trajectory you were going to chart. But nonetheless, you know, he didn't actually break a manifesto promise in that regard. Matthew's saying a referendum will result in the retention of first past the post 2011. I think someone else had just said, not sure. The public liked voting reform first in 2011, but changed their mind when AV was explained. I'll tell you what, 2011 is not comparable. There were several things that were dead against any form of reform. First of all, AV is crap. It's rubbish. Absolutely appalling. The fact that the Lib Dems went with that, as long as my arse looks south, I do not know why they went for that. I suppose there'll be some reason. I still won't understand it. The other problem is that the Lib Dems were shit at campaigning. They were absolutely terrible in that referendum campaign. And what happened? They all complained that David Cameron played dirty in the referendum campaign. Were they unaware he's a Tory? Were they unaware of that? And the third problem was that Labour at the time were of no help because they were still busy finding themselves. The Labour Party in 2011 was basically like a hippie going out into the desert to discover themselves. They were of neither use nor ornament at the time. So it was a terrible time to have such a referendum. The Lib Dems had not thought it through at all. And they backed the wrong horse in terms of the form of electoral reform. Spectacularly backed the wrong horse. They say Blair or who the consultation with Jenkins review. No, it was later. It was after 97. I checked it all out because I didn't expect my memory to serve something like that, because this came up before. I checked it all out. He might not have won 3 terms if he had ego got in the way. I strongly suspect you are correct. Again, I won't know what his personal reasons are for not wanting proportional representation or some form of voting reform, but I strongly suspect it was based on the idea that he thought it was better for him to have all the power. And this is why I think there's a real opportunity. I know we've run out of time. I'll just go the last few quickly. I think there's a real opportunity, not immediately, but in the next 10 years. And it's because, first of all, I think there was a bigger opportunity when Labour were not on for a majority government. And who knows, if the race for the election tightens up again next year, who knows, it can change again. But that was the best chance. If Labour weren't going to win majority power anyway, what are they losing by having proportional representation? Nothing. The other issue is, I think now people in Labour there are still going to be those selfish people, and those selfish people are MPs who don't want to risk their seat. You know, like MPs in Liverpool and Manchester not wanting Tory MPs there, even if it means nationally the party does better. But in terms of the membership, there'll be much more of a push for it, because they'll just, everything Labour do, they'll just look at it and go, that's grand. It's all ashes as soon as the Tories come back in. Because that's what people are going to be thinking. You know, you can imagine Labour implementing reforms, and if Labour had to form a coalition with the Lib Dems and the Greens, there will be compromises. They won't all see eye to eye on the best way forward, but that coalition would preserve the reforms that have already been implemented. They wouldn't reverse them. Even a Conservative Lib Dem coalition wouldn't reverse them. So, and also you would create the conditions whereby the Lib Dems wouldn't have to form coalitions with the Conservatives in the way that they did in 2010. They were sort of almost held hostage there a little bit, because it was the only way to form a stable government, whereas proportional representation, the Conservatives are very unlikely to win enough seats to form a stable coalition with any one party for quite a long time, in fact, if ever. But there it is. Do I mind going on Sunday roast with Bowler Hat Man? I don't mind going on Sunday roast with anyone. I generally don't always even know who I am going on with when I'm on. 5-hour hearing for Johnson on Wednesday, apparently. Oh, well, I didn't know that. If that's the case, then given that the hearing isn't till 2 o'clock, I assume there's breaks in that. That means I definitely... It is all inconvenient, though. There's too much happening on Wednesday. So you've got PMQs. You've got now the vote for the Windsor framework, which will only be interesting in terms of the rebellion, if the size of it, and then the Boris Johnson thing. I suppose I could put... I'll have to think about the schedule for next week. But anyway, but yes, thanks for coming, everyone. We'll be back on next week. I might be a bit haggard next week because I'm trying to decide, assuming I've got all my videos done in time, which of the rejoin events I'm going to be going to next Saturday. Because there's a few in reasonable driving distance of me. I shall have to, I'm thinking of Sheffield at the moment. But anyway, I shall decide later in the week. And of course, it all depends on me actually getting my work done before Saturday. But thanks very much, anyone, for coming on. Have a good evening. And until next time, I'll see you later.